with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce David Cobb. David is, among many things, he is one of our National Move to Amend leaders. He's one of the founders of the organization nationally. He also has ran for in 2004, he ran for president of the United States in the Green Party. He is an activist and member of many organizations, and the list is quite extensive. Sierra Club, several other organizations for better clean elections. He's been arrested for civil disobedience. He has, of course, I always think that's a little bit of a badge of honor. He is one of our fearless leaders, and he really has some amazing things to share with us tonight. So with that, if I forgot anything, I'll wrap it up at the end. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to David. Please welcome David.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And like Dana, my voice tends to carry. I'm the grandson of a Baptist preacher, so I feel like I can carry this room. But I want to make sure that if there's anybody who is having difficulty at all, this is a comfortable volume for me. But if there's anybody, feel free, we'll mic it up. But if folks are all right, it'd be my preference to just be able to have a conversation like this. Is that good? Yeah. All right, good. So I got to say that a couple of things real quick. Number one, I am a lawyer by training, but more importantly, I'm an engaged citizen.
David, we do have somebody that needs.
All right, well, look, let's just go mic this up. We'll get there. Thank you for that, Ruth. And so that, no problem at all. And I'll use this as an opportunity to just put up some quick notes while we wait for the house to get here. And you said left ear, right?
Left ear.
So I'm just going to be still while you do that. All right. And you want to put that in whatever pocket you... Thank you. And now let me make sure I don't shout, which is my want. And don't worry, Abram, I know you're back there. I'm going to give you a good, clean open. And can we just take a note that as great as this crowd is, and it is great, thanks to the people's media in the house, thousands more are going to hear and see this message. Let's just get a round of applause to Abram. So as Dana said, my name is David Cobb, and I'm a lawyer by training. I practiced law for over a decade, but I consider myself these days an engaged citizen. I've sued corporate polluters. I've lobbied elected officials. As Dana mentioned, I've run for office myself. I ran for Attorney General of Texas on the platform that if elected to that position as the Attorney General for the state of Texas, I would use that office to revoke the charters of corporations that were routinely violating health, safety, public interest, and environmental protection laws. A people's lawyer. And I have been arrested for nonviolent civil disobedience. And I can't help but to notice that was what got a round of applause started from Stephen and many others. So I feel like I'm in the right place, right? All the other stuff that I did, but I'm sorry?
What did you get arrested?
Well, a couple of things. Protesting timber harvest plans and protesting in 2004 for being excluded from the presidential debates. Right? I mean, I had the audacity to think that as a presidential candidate, I ought to be able to speak at the presidential debates. And not just that I should have a right to speak, but that the American people should have a right to hear alternative viewpoints. And And I'm proud to tell you that myself and Michael Badnarik, the Libertarian Party candidate, were both arrested together, arm in arm, for that idea. There's something happening in this country, friends. And the thing is, I tell you all that to say that I do believe that we have to use every tool available, every tactic available to create the systemic change we so desperately need and so richly deserve in this country. I stand before you as a revolutionary. Now, a nonviolent revolutionary, absolutely. I'm committed to nonviolence, and in every way you will see that from me and Move to Amend. But we also don't shy away from the reality that we need transformational change in this country. We can't just tinker at the margins. We've got to actually embrace the fact that we need to recreate the social, political, and economic institutions in this country in order to create the society that all of us actually want to live in. So I believe in actually telling the truth that way and being really clear up front about it. And here's the thing, y'all. I stand before you believing I probably don't need to convince you that things are bad. Right? I feel like the fact that you come here tonight, you already probably know that there is a problem in this country, right? So I'm going to dispense with that. I don't think I have to persuade you that things are bad, but I do think I have to persuade you that Move to Amend has a plan to win and persuade you to get involved with us. So I'm going to take that up. And because I want to be persuasive with you, I want to share with you something that I learned intuitively as a successful trial lawyer, and now science is actually proving, and that's this. If you want to be persuasive, facts don't matter so much. Y'all, the first time I heard it said that way, I thought, this is terrible. Like many of you, I've invested a lot of time and energy in facts. Right? And there is this idea that if you can just present facts logically and cogently, well, everybody will see the truth, and that somehow change will happen. But then I came across the work of a cognitive scientist named George Lakoff. Oh, some of you know this name. George Lakoff, by studying the human brain and how we process information, what George Lakoff says is, look, the brain is not a supercomputer that just collects data, runs algorithms, and spits out results, right? Lakoff said, quite simply, we have to understand that the human brain and the way we actually understand the world is through stories. And the stories that we tell over and over to one another is how we make sense of the world. And the stories that we hear over and over in our society become our cultural narrative, or the frame by how we see the world. And so what Lakoff said is, look, facts do matter, but only if you present your facts in light of the existing narrative or the story. You have to tell people facts in a way that actually makes sense to them and how they understand the world to work. And so since I want to be persuasive, and I know that you understand the world through stories just like I do, y'all, I'm fixing to tell a story. I'm going to tell the story on how it came to be that large transnational corporations are not just exercising power today. I'm going to tell the story on how corporations are ruling us. As surely as masters once ruled slaves, as surely as kings once ruled subjects, unelected and unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling in this country because they're making the decisions. Corporate CEOs are getting to make the decisions on how much poison is in the air we're breathing right now. Corporate CEOs already made the decision on how much toxins can be in the public water supply of Asheville, North Carolina. Corporate CEOs are deciding whether you can get health care or not. Corporate CEOs decided to take this country into war. And we, the people, we get to choose between Coke and Pepsi. We can choose between paper or plastic at a grocery store checkout line. Heck, we can have 17 different types of toothpaste to choose from. You think I'm joking? Next time you go down that aisle at the supermarket, count them up. See what you don't get 17 or more. Think of me when you do it. All I'm saying is, we in this society are inundated with consumer choices, provided you have the money to pay. Think about that for a minute. What happened in our society that human need is not actually how we're structuring our society. But even if you are blessed to be able to afford most of the consumer choices that are presented to you and you feel pretty good about that, don't confuse a consumer choice with political power. Because you see, political power would be the opportunity to participate in a meaningful way with how our society is organized, how goods and services are produced and allocated. You know, that would be real political power. And saying it that way, I think it's clear to me anyway that we've got a disconnect there. And so I am going to tell a story, and as I tell the story, I want to challenge you to challenge me. Ask yourself, is this a story that only liberals and progressives could hear and appreciate? or has moved to men figured out a way to start to tell a story that can invite all Americans into this narrative. That regardless of region, regardless of gender, regardless of race and ethnicity, even regardless of ideology, is this a story that can begin to build a broad-based movement to actually be able to make the United States of America the functioning democratic republic that I was taught it was when I was a little boy. And I'll tell you something, when I was a little boy, I was so proud to be an American. I really was. Liberty, justice, equality. And the thing is, what pains me and makes me righteously angry is I grew up and realized I had been lied to. And not lying like an intentional deceit, but lied to in terms of the creation myth. And here's the thing, y'all. We don't have a functioning democracy, but we can. And that's part of what this narrative is about. And as I tell the story, I'm going to make sure that we cover 4 topics together. Abram, I want to make sure, can you zero in on that? You got it good. So the first topic on the board, and I'll say it out loud for those who may not see the board, the first word on the board is the word democracy. That word is very important in this country, and it gets tossed around a lot. So let's make sure we've got some common agreement. Anybody know from what language the word democracy derives? Greek. Very good. An erudite audience. Demos means the people. Kratia, K-R-A-T-I-A, in Attic Greek. Anybody know what that means? Very good. It means rule. So literally, the word democracy, translated from the Attic Greek, means the people rule. Pop quiz. How many of y'all believe we the people are ruling in the United States? Don't be shy. I got one hand. I do this presentation all across the country, friends. I ask that question everywhere I go. I usually get 1, maybe 2 at most. Everybody else keeps their hands down. That's a problem. But saying it another way, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we are being courageous enough to say that actually we don't have a functioning democracy. Notwithstanding what we were taught as children, notwithstanding what we deserve, notwithstanding what we want, we don't have a functioning democracy. Actually, if we stayed with the Attic Greek, would say actually we have a plutocracy, the rule by a wealthy elite. Sometimes I think we ought to actually make up a new word and say it's actually a kleptocracy, a rule by a thieving wealthy elite. Right? Because they're stealing from us. They are stealing our labor. They are stealing the natural resources that we hold in common, one for all. And they're stealing our future. And most importantly, I want to name this. They're stealing our children and our grandchildren's future. And that's going to continue unless we interrupt it and build a movement that is significant. Do you need me to talk louder?
No, right. You're right.
Oh, I'm right. Okay. He's giving me one of these. So this is the thing. The word democracy is very powerful, and we got to come to terms with it. And that brings me to the next topic, which is sovereignty. Friends, if I just had the word the sovereign on the board, who or what would you think of? Quick, the sovereign. King. I bet almost everybody here thought king, right? That's because the word sovereignty means the authority to rule. And 500 years ago, the sovereign was the king. The king was the sovereign. Those words were literally synonymous. And where did the king claim his authority to rule? God. Being born, the son of the king, God says, you're the king. That's a powerful bit of power, isn't it? I mean, wow. To illustrate what I mean by this, we'll do a quick little exercise. This exercise is always fun for me. You'll see. I wanted you to if you're willing to, close your eyes and repeat after me. David Cobb is the king. I told y'all this was fun for me, but nobody did it. Let me try it again. See if I can get you to do this one. Because David is God's representative on this earth. Oh, no. How about this one? And therefore, anything David says, we must obey without question. All right. All right, well, normally this is where I would say open your eyes, but to your credit, Asheville, ain't nobody's eyes closed. Good on you. But you did do what everybody does. As soon as you realized what I was actually trying to get you to say, you all laughed at me. Do you notice that? Everybody chuckled, laughed about it. And you laughed not because it was like, oh, what a witty and droll comment. No, you laughed because it's absurd. In fact, the comedian would say, that's a cheap laugh, David. It's called absurd humor, right? You tried to get them to say something they know is ridiculous, so they just kind of laughed about it, chuckled, right? I mean, the idea that I can tell you how to live your life because who my daddy is, it's crazy, right? Even better that I get to say how all y'all are going to live. I get to say how society will be organized because of the divine right of kings. Of course you laughed at that. And friends, 500 years ago, people just like you and you and you and me not only said it, but believed it. I'm taking a moment to really ask you to contemplate what that means, right? In other words, the question of sovereignty, not only who has the authority to rule, but what it means, like how decisions are made and implemented in society, that might be one of the most important things that a group of human beings answer for themselves. And the thing is, as Dana said in the introductions, I'm a Green Party member, and I'm proud of that. You know what else I'm proud of? I have a long history of working in coalition and partnership with Democrats on issues where we have common ground. And I'm going to go one better. I have a history of working in coalition with Republicans and Libertarians on issues where there is common ground. See, I have a history of working in coalition with people on issues where there is genuine common ground, authentically and seriously, right? And I say it not so you'll pat me on the head. I say it so you'll appreciate what I mean when I say, in my 25 years of social change work, looking for coalition partners, looking for people to collaborate with, I've never had the privilege or the opportunity to work in coalition with a monarchist. I can't find any. They don't exist anymore. And 500 years ago, that's all there were. And 500 years is the blink of an eye in human history. And here's the follow-up to that, friends. And here the Texan gonna get metaphysical, so y'all hold on. I know that. We are all individually participating in creating our shared collective reality. Another way to say it is, as soon as enough people in society think that something is true, and as soon as enough people in society start to act like it's true, it becomes true. This is actually how society and culture replicates itself. So if it is true that the United States of America is fundamentally racist, sexist, and class oppressive, and that is true, and if it is true that these huge corporations are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself, and that is true, see, if these things are true, I suggest maybe we ought to start to think and act differently. Maybe we ought to start thinking and acting like we're in a historic moment of crisis. You know why I think we might need to start thinking and acting like this is a moment of crisis? Because this is a moment of crisis. We need to say it out loud and have the courage to acknowledge it. You see, the global climate crisis, it's not coming, it's here. And it's going to get worse unless and until we interrupt it. The economic crisis is not coming, it's here. And by the way, it's not over. If you think the housing crisis was bad, wait till the student debt crisis hits. Right? We are imposing on this generation of young people a crushing debt load, the likes of which people of my generation and older cannot even fathom. Oh, and by the way, there aren't any jobs for them when they get out. Oh, and by the way, we don't have a budget crisis. Not in this state, not in the United States. This economy has produced more wealth than has ever been produced in the history of the world. We have an allocation crisis, not a budget crisis. We've got a small group of people who are sucking up all of the money, all of the labor, everything that we're collectively creating, they are sucking it up and hoarding it. And it reminds me of what my daddy taught me about money. He said, son, money is a lot like horse manure. If you pile it up in one spot, it smells like what it really is. But if you spread it around, you can do a lot of good with it. All I'm getting at is the recognition that this economic crisis is actually going to continue to get worse unless we address the root causes of it, which is actually that we're allowing a group of people to hoard wealth and money. Right? Actually, if they were hoarding anything other than wealth and money the way they do, we would recognize it to be a mental illness. Right? I mean, they got reality television shows about it now, right? Have y'all seen these? Like, they literally, these folks are hoarding. That's all they're doing. It's craziness. Here's the thing, that economic crisis, it's only going to get worse. And here's another thought. What if capitalism can't solve this economic crisis? What if capitalism is this economic crisis? Planting seeds. Just planting seeds. Here's the thing. Ecological crisis, economic crisis, and friends, we have a political crisis. The political crisis is the fact that fewer and fewer people are voting because they don't think that voting even matters in this system. And what we're seeing is an ever-emergent, we can't call it anything but a police state. Right? Look, sadly, it is not uncommon that young black men are murdered by police. Right? And we saw that with Michael Brown. But you know what is new for me as somebody who really pays attention? The level of hyper-militarized police response in Ferguson, Missouri. Have y'all seen this before? I don't remember this. This is something new. We're living in a new moment in history, and we need to act accordingly. Lovingly, peacefully, but fiercely, we need to act accordingly. So these crises are coming, right? And I'm going to tell you that I want to remind you, don't get too scared about it, because in the Chinese language where they use symbols for words, the symbol for crisis is also the symbol for another word. Opportunity. Opportunity. Friends, we are blessed and cursed to be human beings at this moment in world history. We're cursed because what we have to deal with. We're blessed because we're the first group of human beings that can honestly say with reality that with the technology that is available, the human knowledge that is amassed, and what we actually know, everybody could get enough food to eat. And I mean everybody. Everybody could have access to really good quality health care, good education, adequate shelter. Literally no other group of human beings have actually been able to say that on a global level, that is absolutely true. Again, our problems are not technological problems anymore. They are political problems. Because if we, the people, collectively actually had the ability to implement the solutions that existed, we would have a different world like that, wouldn't we? It's a political crisis. All these crises together are going to require us to come to terms with how do we actually cut the Gordian knot of those interrelated crises. And that actually brings me to the next topic, which is legal personhood. Please note I did not write corporate personhood on the board. Right? That's because I really want us to understand that the concept of legal personhood just means the ability to assert rights. And since we're talking about legal personhood, we literally mean the ability to assert rights under law. And saying it that way, I hope this is obvious. This is not a question that only lawyers should concern themselves with. This is not something that only the intellectual class should be concerned with. The question of who is a legal person and can confidently assert rights and have those rights respected in law and culture is at the very heart of every social movement this country has ever seen. From the abolitionist movement to the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement, you can't name a movement that I can't show you was actually about a group of human beings trying to assert their rights and have their rights respected and acknowledged in law and culture. It matters. And the last word on the board, at least for now, is the word corporation. Anybody know what that word is from? Language. It's Latin. Very good. Corpus means body. And the suffix tion in Latin just means to have or create. So literally the word corporation translated from Latin means to have or create body. And by body I mean physical body, right? That's because in law school we are taught. And by the way, are there any lawyers in the crowd besides me that would admit it? See, he raised his hand confidently, so he must be a people's lawyer. You always tell like people who do law that to actually benefit other folks are like, damn right, I'm a lawyer. Right? So, sir, you're the only one who raised your hand. Do you remember in law school, like I do, being taught that a corporation is a legal fiction? Yes. See, I've never met a lawyer who doesn't remember that. It's like ground into us, right? In fact, So a corporation is a legal fiction. In fact, if you, even if you didn't go to law school, if you've heard that phrase, even if you couldn't precisely define it, if you've just heard that a corporation is legal fiction, raise your hand. For real. See, all these hands go up, right? So friends, if a corporation is a legal fiction, that begs this question. What does the word fiction mean? Fake, not true, made up. I remember day one of corporations class, the professor stood before us and she said, you have to understand, students, that a corporation is a legal fiction because it doesn't actually exist in the material physical world. And at the time I thought, isn't that called reality? But she went on to explain, however, we're going to pretend like this group of people, the investors, the shareholders, but also the contractual obligations that they make and the resources that they bring together and the cultural assumptions in society, we're going to pretend like this construct, this concept is a single thing so that we can treat it a certain way under law. And remember, folks, if enough people in society think that something is true and enough people in society act like it's true, and here is something very important. A corporation as a construct is only what we in society says it is. Nothing more and nothing less. We actually have profound social, societal opportunity. In fact, we have the responsibility to define what a corporation is and how it should be treated under law and what it should be allowed to do or not do. And I also want to point out this, that the word corporation comes from Latin because the first corporations that we would understand were actually created during the Roman Republic. Not, by the way, during the Roman Empire. And sometimes I wish we spent a little more time in this country asking, what does happen when a republic devolves into an empire? Because that might be another important conversation. Think about that. But here's the kick. The Romans created this construct of a corporation for a reason. For example, how many people here have heard, or better yet said this phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Right? Like it's 2,000 years later, we still say that, right? Well, check it out. That elaborate road system was built and operated as a corporation. Likewise, the aqueduct system, that amazing bit of engineering that moved water all across the Italian peninsula without electricity. Can I just say for a moment, one of the reasons that I have sincere and genuine optimism, even in light of all the other stuff that's going on, I am genuinely optimistic. You know why? Human beings are clever, right? In fact, I don't think you could name a problem that I can't give you the answer to if you give me about 30 minutes and access to the internet. Because I'm not saying I have the answer, I don't. But in 30 minutes or less, I can find a solution that somebody has figured out. Actually, correction. I can find a group of people working cooperatively together who have actually figured it out. Because here's another thing that society, that the ruling elite tries to keep from us, but we know in our hearts are true, and science proves as well, we're better together. When we cooperate together, when we work together in a common purpose, we always do better. That's actually human nature, right? It takes billions of dollars to convince us to be individualists, when actually what we want to do is cooperate with one another. It's an amazing phenomenon. But here's the thing. That aqueduct system, it was built, operated, and maintained as a corporation. Likewise, the first universities, the first hospitals. Can you guess? Corporation, corporation. Pop quiz, y'all. What is a road system, a water system, a university, a hospital? What do they all have in common? Who or what do they serve? The people, the public. Everything I just said is actually a public good that is being done. And here is where I want us to really understand that the concept of the corporation as a legal construct was created in order to facilitate, under law, a mechanism to help take private resources and put it to some public good or public use. Saying it that way, I hope it's, yeah, you can applaud that, right? Here's the thing, I want to be really clear. David Cobb and Move to Amend are not anti-corporation. We think that's a foolish conversation. We're also not pro-corporation. We think that's a foolish conversation. It misses the point, right? In fact, that's about like saying, Ruth and I getting into an argument about hammers. And Ruth says, I'm pro-hammer. And I say, I'm anti-hammer. And we like back and forth on that because a corporation is a tool. To prove what I mean by that, or to illustrate, Ruth, I'm going to use you as an example. Is that all right? So Ruth, I want in this example you to imagine for a moment that sadly you're a houseless person. You don't have a place to live. But luckily, standing before you is a skilled craftsperson. Hammer in hand, and I'm building a house that you're going to live in. And I'm good at this. This house is going to keep the snow off of you in the winter. It's going to keep the rains off of you in the spring. So is that a good hammer right now, Ruth? Yeah, right? Good hammer, right? So now, Ruth, I want you to imagine the same scenario. I have a hammer in my hand, but now my intention is to bash your skull in. Is this a good hammer? Folks, it's a trick question. Say it louder. The hammer didn't change, did it? It's the same hammer. Folks, corporations are like hammers in the sense that they're tools. Corporations may well be, as a concept, one of the most powerful tools that human beings have actually created because they really are. They have incredible power. And they can also be used for some of the most important things that you can imagine, right? This mechanism to facilitate, so the problem in our society today is not the existence of corporations. The problem is the social and legal and political systems in which what we're allowing to happen with the hammer, right? But I also want to point out something, friends. This notion of a legal mechanism to just create public good, that's not how the modern transnational corporation operates, is it? That's because the modern transnational corporation, it actually comes out of the 14th and 15th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery. I have to put discovery in imaginary quotation marks because, after all, what did the Europeans discover in the 14th and 15th century? Well, Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Newsflash, there were people living there. They weren't lost. Nobody got discovered. And so in the same spirit of truth-telling and honesty that we did about recognizing that this country is not a functioning democracy, let's tell this truth. The 14th and 15th century of Europe wasn't the age of discovery at all, notwithstanding what our textbooks say. It was the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. See, that's what empire means. It means beating people down. It means stealing from them. And here's the thing. The modern transnational corporation, when they were first created, they were called joint stock companies. And they were created to facilitate empire. For example, one of the earliest of the joint stock companies was known as the East India Company, literally designed to militarily conquer the entire subcontinent of India. And not only that, but to destroy their existing civilization and force those people to work and labor to steal the natural resources of their own land so it could be sent to the shareholders of the East India Company as profit. It was a business model based on empire. Another one of those joint stock companies was the Africa Trading Company. Anybody want to guess what the Africa Trading Company traded? Folks, I'm going to use myself as an example because I want to be honest and courageous, and I don't think white people talk about race and whiteness often enough. The reason most of us think about the word slave, and I do too, if you asked, what did the Africa Trading Company trade? The word that would pop into my mind is slaves. Because after all, I'd been taught about the African slave trade and the North Atlantic slave trade. And I've been taught about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth as runaway slaves who helped other slaves run away. And that's the way it's always talked about. Here's a question. What if Harriet Tubman, since we were little children, was described to us as a self-liberated human being? See the distinction there? It's the same basic concept, but doesn't it evoke something completely different in the narrative and story? And the reason that I'm making such a big deal about the word slave now, see, I'm not a bad person. Most of you don't know me, but I'm just going to tell you, I'm a good person. I really am. But I do think of slave if somebody asks, what did the Africa Trading Company trade? Because I'm of this society and culture. But now that I've made a big deal about that word, let's ask this follow-up question. In the 14th century, when the Africa Trading Company was first created and then in operation for the next 2 centuries, was Africa populated by a bunch of slaves? No, Africa was populated by people. Africa was populated by people. And may I say now, with some trepidation, but with conviction, Africa was populated by people who were basically just like me. Now, I say it with trepidation because I know my skin color. I'm not foolish. But I say it with conviction because if you ask any scientist, if you ask any biologist, she or he will tell you race doesn't exist. Pigment is trivial when it comes to humanity, right? So those people were basically just like me and you and any other human being. We've been trained to think about that differently, but it's just pigment, y'all. Race doesn't exist. Oh, but check this out. Racism damn sure does. Wait, how can that be? Oh, yes, if enough people think that something is true, and enough people act like it's true, it becomes true. Race is a construct, the same way that the corporation is a construct. It's created culturally and socially. And what I'm pushing myself and you to really come to terms with is that they created these concepts, right? And there is a ruling elite who created the idea of whiteness. See, you know what country created whiteness, by the way? This one. This is the thing. Ethnicity precedes the United States. Nations precede the United States. Others precede the United States. This country uniquely created whiteness. Before this country, the idea of a Scot or an Irish person or an English person or a Scandinavian all getting together and say, oh, we're basically white, would not have even occurred to them. It wasn't part of their social construct. And I think I figured out why that construct was created. Y'all want to hear it? So that the ruling elite could confuse and befuddle people who look like me. Here's what I mean by that. If you look like me, if you're white, and you are exploited and oppressed as a member of the underclass or an indentured servant or otherwise just part of the working class, you understand the boss man's boot is on my neck. Hey, I hate this system. This ain't fair. Oh, but at least I'm white. I'm telling you, friends, the reason I'm really driving this home is to force us to understand that whiteness was created to confuse people about how the ruling class actually separates us. And here's the other thing. Anybody who actually, this whole idea of white pride is actually dangerous and stupid. In fact, it's really stupid because if anybody thinks that their white skin means anything to the real ruling elite, why don't you go show up at a country club, knock on the door and say, I ain't got no money, but I'm white. Can I come on in? See how far you get. But here's the thing. White skin privilege does exist. And what it means is, for example, that no white mother has to actually honestly think about what Mike Brown's mother has to think about and remember forever. And that every black mother has to think about a conversation with her adolescent child at some point to have that talk about how you have to actually be prepared about how society actually treats you because of your skin color. So the point I'm making, and the reason I'm really at a Move to Amend presentation going into race, is because it's a construct. It's created. And what underlines corporatism, imperialism, racism, is exploitation and oppression. And at the end of the day, if we're actually going to be serious about creating a completely new world that is peaceful, just, democratic, and ecologically sustainable, we're going to have the courage to cut that Gordian knot and stop fooling around and say we need institutions that are loving and compassionate and beautiful, and everybody and every human being is equally valuable and really mean it.
Find out it's humanity.
Yeah, right. Thank you for that. For me, it makes if I was in the audience, I'd have clapped because I really think that's it. I'm sorry.
What did he say?
No, this gentleman said we need to find our humanity, our shared humanity.
Define that as humanity.
To define it as humanity. So here's the thing, folks. This whole presentation around Move to Amend is actually to push me and us to actually recognize what is the work at hand, right? Yes, we need to pass a 28th Amendment, but we also have to come to terms with the fact that our social, political, and economic institutions are not actually working the way we want them to, and we have to have the courage to think the way the revolutionaries did, the way the women's suffrage movement did, the abolitionist movement, the trade union movement, the civil rights movement, and I promise you, once you let go of the fear of, oh, that's too big, and you actually embrace the recognition that thinking and talking that way actually puts us on the firm footing that we need to actually loving and compassionately create that world, to me, it's the most liberating thing in the world. It is an amazing phenomenon. And as a revolutionary, I want to remind you that, that thinking this way and talking this way is actually a very important thing. And to make my story a particularly American story, because remember, this is a story. To make this story make sense and make it American, I want to ask, in the founding of this country, how many colonies? 13. Everybody knows this, right? How many colonies? 13. So since you know that with such certainty, I want to ask this follow-up question. Of those 13 colonies, how many were corporations? Yeah, Dana's right. See, it's a trick question. Remember that the word corporation means to have or create body. And so I will tell you that it took the king to create every one of those, to give body to the king created Massachusetts. Now somebody might be thinking, that's ridiculous. Massachusetts was already there. But that's why it's a trick question. The land was there. The people who lived on the land. But it took the king to create Massachusetts. And the king created Massachusetts by the use of a very particular legal instrument called a charter. To illustrate what I mean by that and how it works, we'll do another exercise. In this exercise, I'll be the king. Hey, why do y'all think I get to be the king again?
You got the microphone.
Exactly. She said, because you've got the microphone. Dana said, you're on the podium. In other words, I'm telling the story. See how important stories are? See how important it is that we should ask who's telling us these stories? Because I want to remind us to confront the reality that in the United States of America today, 8 corporations are telling about 75% of every story you hear. Whether it's a news story, or a book, or a movie, or a poem, or any cultural narrative, we have allowed a media consolidation to actually take place. That's one of the reasons that I asked at the beginning, and I'll ask again. Can we get a round of applause for Abram, who is the people's media, who's actually decided that we're going to start telling our own stories, right? So thank you for that. In this little example, though, I'll be the king. I create Massachusetts. But I'm not going to bother with the day-to-day administration and affairs of Massachusetts. After all, I'm the king. I've got other things to do. So instead, I will create a royal governor. And now, I will quote from this is the actual charter that created Massachusetts. The king creates Massachusetts, defines its geography, and then appoints a royal governor and assigns the royal governor with the responsibility under law, quote, to plant, to rule, and to govern this entire area on behalf of me, the king, to benefit me, the king, but also to benefit the other shareholders of the joint stock company known as the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. Massachusetts began as a for-profit corporation on the same business model as the East India Company did. So too was Rhode Island, the Rhode Island and Providence Plantation. Virginia began as the Virginia Company. Hell, Georgia was a penal corporation. Anybody know what skin color? She said still is. Anybody? That was a good one. Anybody know what skin color, though, the original basic servants or slaves had who worked at Georgia Penal Corporation were? White, just like me. This is the thing, friends. When I say that white people are confused by race and ethnicity and whiteness, this is what I'm talking about. We don't know our own history because the ruling elite have confused us around how that actually operates. But all I'm getting at is the charter that created Massachusetts and every other one, the reality was that the bringing of the corporate form into this country originally were very specifically in order to steal the resources from this area and send it back to the king and to the other shareholders of the East India Company. And also, because I'm a revolutionary, I want to remind you that in the American Revolution, the revolutionaries won. Right? And one of the things that happens when you win a revolution is you get to describe a new charter. You get to start to talk about how to organize society in a different way. And in the United States of America, a new charter was written. Anybody know what that charter was called? The supreme law of the land? The U.S. Constitution. How many of y'all have read that document? Be honest. Okay, a lot of hands go up. That's good. You can grade my papers. See if I don't get this right. I'll tell you this. When you read the Constitution in its entirety, you will see two big concepts at play. The first concept is probably the most important one. In fact, it's so important, it's the first three words. We the people. Those are hallowed words in this country, and they should be, because we the people come together to create the second concept, which is government itself. Saying it another way, we the people create government. Government is dependent upon us. I like how some of my friends say it. They say the people should never be afraid of the government. Actually, they say government should be afraid of the people. How many of y'all believe government is afraid of the people? Yeah, see, it's a slow burn question. For some of us, it's like, hell yeah. For those of you who didn't raise your hand immediately, here's a follow-up question. If government isn't afraid of us, why are they spying on us? The emperor has no clothes. There's more of us than there are of them. We have more power than we dare to believe, actually. We're just not exercising it collectively. The ruling elite are scared of us. And you know what? That includes the 1%. The ones who really run the show. They're deathly afraid of us. And in fact, if I ever had the opportunity to look like I am with you, ma'am, like as a human being, one to another, and I only had a short time with one of the real, like the uber ruling elite, the billionaires, you know what I think I'd like to say? Please don't be scared of us. I think that's what I'd like to really communicate. I'd like to look in her, or probably his, eyes, and I'd like to say, please don't be scared of us. Actually, we are a peaceful and loving people and a peaceful and loving movement. And I know that right now you're so addicted to the crack pipe of power and wealth accumulation that you can't see it. But I promise you that your grandchildren are going to be grateful that I and millions of others finally got together and staged a loving, nonviolent intervention on your addicted ass. We're going to do it lovingly, but we're going to do it because these people, the real ruling elite, they are addicted. In fact, they're mentally ill. And I don't make that as a joke, y'all. I have mental illness in my family, okay? It's serious mental illness. And people who are mentally ill need and deserve help, right? And if we had a just and compassionate society, single-payer health care, if we had a just and compassionate society for mentally ill people, they would get the help that they need. And instead of getting these mentally ill people help, we put them in charge. We should think about that, right? Like, we need to actually enter into the social, political, and economic fray in every way. And can I say once more, as Dana did, for every one of you who are running for political office, I don't care if it's a Democrat, a Republican, a Green, a Libertarian, an Independent, if you're running for office, would you please stand up? Can we? Yes. And once more, I don't know any of these people. Just tell us your name and what office you're running for.
Terry Van Dyne, North Carolina, Senate District 49.
John Ager, North Carolina, House District 115.
State Senate District 48.
And your name?
Rick Wood.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. And see, this is the thing, y'all. I don't know these people, but I know this. When somebody who's seeking to serve the public comes to public forums like this, that means something to me. I hope it means something to you. And like, I don't know any one of them, but I just know this. The fact that they're here means something, right? And I also think it also recognizes this idea that done correctly, we the people are supposed to be controlling government. And in this framework, you see, we the people control government, and in this framework, the way it's supposed to operate, we the people are free and we are sovereign. And what does the word sovereign mean again?
Rule ourselves.
We rule ourselves. See, government isn't sovereign. And certainly the king isn't sovereign. We kicked him out. But government doesn't have the authority to rule over us. In fact, in our system, government is supposed to be subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom? The people, the sovereign people. Government is accountable to whom? We, the sovereign people. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it? I like how this is going. Let's continue. We, the people, are free and sovereign because we, the people, have rights. Government does not have rights. Government only has duties. And as a lawyer, I really want to underscore something, friends. The difference between rights and duties is profound. And I'll come back to my brother at the bar, my fellow lawyer, to make sure I get this right. Correct, I should say, that rights, constitutional rights, are not dependent upon the political process. In other words, if Ellie's rights are violated by a law that went through a political process and the majority of city council voted on it, but she believes that her constitutional rights are violated by that law, should she be able to go into court and have that law overturned? Yes. Yeah, of course, right? Because her rights are not dependent upon the political process. See, the Constitution doesn't create rights. The Constitution recognizes rights. In fact, and y'all don't get alarmed, it's one button. For those in the back who can't see, I'm pointing at my belly button. If you're too shy to check in this public place, please go home tonight. Make sure you have one. Because if you do, you also have human rights. In other words, our human rights are not dependent upon our ethnicity, where we were born, what bioregion we live in, what gender we are, what religion we practice, if we practice religion at all. Human rights are sacred. They are not subject to the political discourse and process. And the government never has rights over the people. Government has duties to the people. And where do those duties... See, duties are responsibilities. And where do governmental duties come from? Well, remember, all power resides with the people. In fact, the revolutionaries said it well. They said, no government is even legitimate if it does not have the consent of the governed. Political power is held by the people in any jurisdiction. Which brings me to this pop quiz question. What's the population, more or less, of Asheville, North Carolina? About 85,000, more or less? Fair enough. So let's just say 85,000 people. I will celebrate that 85,000 people hold all the political power in Asheville, North Carolina. That's a true statement. I'll honor that statement. But I'll tell you this, I would hate to go to a meeting of 85,000 people where we decide where should stop signs go. And I like political meetings. I am so not going to that meeting. Can you imagine the chaos? I mean, not just each and every stop sign, but what about the sewer system? What about, in other words, yes, the people of Asheville do hold all the political power. But wisely, in our system of government, we delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Do we delegate all our power to government? No, we only delegate enough power to government to perform the duties that we have assigned them to do. And government performs their duties by writing public policy and making laws. And you know what, friends? There's going to be discourse and debate about public policy, and that's as it should be. And I want to say, friends, I think that we've lost something in this country. We've forgotten that it's okay to have political disagreement and still be agreeable with one another. We've forgotten that. It's so important. And you know what? I remember as a little boy, my daddy and Mr. Barry, y'all are we're kind of out in the country here, so you'll appreciate, Mr. Barry wasn't our next door neighbor because I didn't have a next door neighbor. We had an adjacent land. right? Because I grew up in the country, right? But I remember Daddy and Mr. Barry getting into a fussing match that got really serious. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and it got heightened. And as a little boy, I was right on the verge of tears because I was so distraught. I'd been taught to respect Mr. Barry as my elder and somebody like that, and Daddy, and they're about to fight. Like, I was just on the verge of really just weeping as a little boy. And the next thing I know, they're laughing and cutting it up, and Daddy says, "Oh, Barry, you coot, you crazy loon, I'll see you at the feed store." And as a little boy, I went, "What happened?" As an adult, I think I know what happened. See, both of those men have passed away now, so I can't really know. And I don't remember who actually interrupted that. I like to think maybe it was my daddy who did it, but I don't honestly know. But I do know this. I know what happened. I think they looked at each other and said, "You know what? We're neighbors. My kids play with your kids. In the next hurricane, we're going to need each other just like we always need each other." See, they recognized that they were in human relationship with one another, and that trumped whatever their disagreement was. Now, I will be honest with you. These were white Texas redneck crackers. They didn't say, "We're in human relationship with one another." But that's what it was, right? I mean, it was that concept. It was that recognizing the shared humanity that they had and their mutual interdependence that they had on one another. And I'm saying the ability to actually disagree with somebody and at the end of the day saying, "Doggone it." And here's the thing. I'm going to tell you this. When I disagree with somebody politically, that's when I'm on hyper alert to be civil. That's when I'm on real, I can disagree with you, but I'm going to look hard for the shared humanity. And sometimes we just have to say, we're going to agree to disagree, And maybe that's the time to say, well, how about those Cowboys? But all I'm getting at is there will be disagreement in public policy, and that's okay. But whether you agree or disagree with the public policy, I want to remind you, the one thing that no public law can ever do is to violate somebody's private rights. Just like we used Ellie as the example, her rights are sacred, and the public process can't violate them. And now that I've taken all the time to lay out this framework, and I'll walk them through for those of you who maybe can't see the actual diagram, but I want to show you and tell you actually in one sentence how the U.S. constitutional framework is supposed to operate. Now, this is a run-on sentence to be sure, but it's still just one sentence. Watch this. In the United States Constitution, we the people are free and sovereign because we hold all the political power. But we wisely delegate a certain amount of our power to governmental institutions, which we will always hold to be subordinate and accountable, and we will charge those governments, local, county, state, and federal, with the duty to write public policy and laws. But the one thing we will never allow a public policy to do is to violate the private rights of the free and sovereign people who live there. Ta-da! I mean, isn't that awesome? And I'm serious, not just a little trick that I did, but the concepts at play. Our individual constitutional rights are respected, but we have a public process by which we make societal decisions, but we do not let the majority ever infringe upon somebody's individual rights. This is beautiful. This is amazing. We should try that in this country. This would totally work. And I'm not joking, this is beautiful. And I'm not joking, it's brilliant. And I'm not joking, we've never tried it. Because before I go 1 second further waxing poetic about the U.S. Constitution, a quick little time out to ask, somebody tell me in what year the Constitution gets ratified. What is if you know it, the ratification year of the U.S. Constitution? So now you got it. I heard it. There's a lot of different things to think about. 1787 was the convention. I heard that date. But 2 years later, it was ratified. 1789 is when the United States of America is formally created through the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. The reason I want 1789 on the board, though, is to remind us that we know what legal personhood means, the ability to assert rights under law. So in 1789, who could assert rights under law? What were their characteristics? So you had to be white. If you're not white, you are literally not a legal person and cannot assert rights under this document. If you're not a man, you cannot assert rights under this document. If you are not wealthy, you cannot assert rights under this document. Friends, the problem was never in the concept and the creation myth that we were taught in this country. The problem from jump was how it was applied. The problem from Jump Street was legal personhood. Because this document, for the words and all the beautiful ideas that we've been taught to think about it, we have to appreciate, acknowledge, and tell the truth. This document did not stop the intentional, deliberate efforts at genocide of the human beings who already lived here. This document allowed it. This document didn't stop the enslavement of Africans who were brought at the barrel of a gun and forced to build this country with slave labor. This document was used to codify and allow it. This document didn't protect women, because it's not just that women couldn't vote. It's that women weren't people. Women were not allowed to even own property in their own name. Women were property, and they were treated as such. See, again, the concept of the Constitution, how it's supposed to operate, the reason that you all applauded out of it is because, let me finish up and then we'll do it. But I just really want to underscore, the problem was never in these concepts. The problem was always on, were we serious? And now I do want to ask this quick question. Where should a corporation go? After all, the corporation is the most dominant institution on planet Earth. Well, before I write the word corporation on the board, I want to ask this question. Anybody know what it takes to form a corporation in North Carolina today? 3 people and $60. That's right. And you got to file some paperwork. And as long as you dot the I's and cross the T and your $60 check clears, a clerk, probably paid minimum wage, will rubber stamp that application and issue you what? A charter. That charter is the birth certificate for the corporation. You know what you can do with a corporation charter in North Carolina, according to the corporation code? Answer, anything legally permissible. Apparently you can do illegal things if you own enough money. You can buy legislators and such. But all I'm getting at is we've been trained to think that we are dependent upon this construct known as the corporation. We need them. We have to kowtow to them. We have to grovel before them, right? Now I'm going to take you back to 1789 and tell you what it once took to form a corporation in North Carolina, and this was true for 100 years. A hidden history, not only of North Carolina, but every one of the 13 original states. First, an application didn't go to a clerk. It went to the State House of Representatives, where they discussed it, debated it, and voted on it, and you had to get a majority vote. But that's not enough, because now it goes to the State Senate, where they discuss it, debate it, vote on it, and you got to get another majority vote. But that's still not enough, because after a majority vote of the State House, a majority vote in the State Senate, the application and paperwork goes to the governor, who reads it and has to be willing to sign it. Does that sound anything like a corporate charter today? Of course not. What did I just describe? Law, legislation, politics, right? And here's the trick. The founder's original intent. Anybody heard that phrase before? Right? These conservatives and principal conservatives that claim that they're really concerned about founders' original intent, it is clear from history and law and practice that the founders' original intent of the corporation and the limited liability corporation was that they should be politically controlled. They did not even issue a charter unless there was a clear showing that some public need would be met. And in fact, when the charter was issued, you know how long they would usually last? 5 years, 10 years. No corporate charter ever lasted longer than 20 years. The basic lifespan of a merchant. Because they wanted them to be able to be held accountable. Oh, and get this. If you were issued a charter, all you could do was the specific thing that you had said you would do. If you did any other type of business, do you know what happened to that corporate charter? It got revoked. It was known as ultra vires. In Latin, it means beyond the authority. In other words, it was understood that corporate charters were issued and authorized to do certain things, but not others. Oh, and get this. Not only was it limited in time, not only was it a specific thing, but if you ever were found to do anything that harmed the public trust or the public interest, guess what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked. Corporate charters were once routinely revoked for merely acting outside the public interest. Which brings me to this pop quiz question. I challenge you, name a single one of the Fortune 500 corporations that could even operate with the political restrictions that our founders put on them. I'll wait. None. Now listen, there are tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of corporations that would continue to do business because most corporations are just there to facilitate people being able to do commerce and to be able to do it well and without worrying about their initial, to protect their liability otherwise. But the huge transnational corporation wouldn't even be allowed to operate. Now look, friends, I'm not saying that 1789 was the land of milk and honey. Slavery existed. The patriarchy against women was real, right? The working class were being exploited. But what I'm saying is the tool known as the corporation was politically and properly controlled, right? And so now that's why at Move to Men we're so key on understanding the corporation as a doctrine and a document, or as a tool and an instrument. Because now that we know that it takes an action of state government to create that corporate charter, we understand that the corporate charter can be used to hold the corporation subordinate and accountable. We understand that the corporate charter describes the duties of what a corporation can or cannot do. We understand that a corporate charter should only be allowed to exist if it serves the public interest. Isn't it just obvious that a corporation should and must go here as it always had for over 150 years in this country? And so now, my friends, I thank you for your patience, because here comes the punchline of it all. When the U.S. Supreme Court comes waltzing in, and in an act of supreme judicial activism, by the way, says, notwithstanding stare decisis, our previous court decisions, notwithstanding history, notwithstanding founders' original intent, notwithstanding common damn sense, 5 of us are going to tell 300 million of you, from now on you have to treat this artificial entity created under a political process actually as if it's a person with rights, and that perverts this whole thing. See, corporate personhood is a shorthand for the illegitimate, totally court-created idea that a corporation must be treated as if it's a person with constitutional rights. And friends, that steals our sacred right to self-government. Because no matter how hard we work to get people elected or to get them to pass legislation that we want, any corporate lawyer can now go into court and argue to overturn any law. It means environmental protection laws, worker safety laws, public health laws, as well as campaign finance laws. Corporate constitutional right steals our sacred right to self-government. And what really just chaps my hide as a lawyer is that they're using the legal system to legitimize and legalize the theft of our sacred right to self-government. And I and Move to Men say, ya basta. Enough already. This is crazy. This is not right. It's not ethical, it's not moral, it's not legal, and we don't have to take it. We can do what other, yes, right? We can do what other people have done. We can educate, we can agitate, we can organize, and we have to actually take ourselves as seriously as every other movement did and recognize, as the abolitionists did and the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement and the trade union movement, we have to shift the entire culture so that there is a different politics, a different economics, and a different social structure. So as I come to the end today, I want to be clear. Move to Amend stands for 2 related principles. And I'm going to ask Ruth, if folks haven't gotten one of these, to just make sure, Ruth, everybody has one. That's our introductory brochure. And the reason I want to make sure everybody gets one is because on the back is the proposed We the People amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which makes it clear in no uncertain terms 2 demands. 1, that only living, breathing human beings have inherent and inalienable constitutional rights, also known as the well duh demand. And also that money is not political speech. That this doctrine is also illegitimate, created by the court in the 1970s. Do you know that before the court created this doctrine in an infamous case called Buckley versus Vallejo, it was actually a felony in many states to even use corporate money to influence an election? Think about that for a moment. It was a felony to even use corporate money to influence an election. Look at how low we've sunk that we're not even allowed to protect the integrity of our election process. So as those come around, I want to, again, as Dana did, thank the local Move to Amend for putting this together. Thank every one of the organizations that were here. I want to give another shout out to Abram for making sure that this is available to everybody else. And I want to thank you for being here. And I hope that we have inspired you to actually get active and involved. Thank you. So now what we will do, thank you. Let's do a quick Q&A. Do we want to raise hands, or do you want to just have everybody come? So listen, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, if you'll go up there. If you're not able to, wave your hands and we'll get the microphone to you. Right up there. But before we begin, I want to ask you very quickly, Dana, what did I charge you to come here today?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Ruth, where are you at? What did I charge you?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Friends, it's my standard fee. 0. But you know what, y'all? I do still like to eat. And Move to Amend, has expenses. So what we are going to do is actually do an old-fashioned pass the hat, right? I mean, I told y'all my grandfather was a Baptist preacher. Did you tell? But and so in that same spirit, as these hats go around, I want to be clear. This is a free will gift. I offered you a gift of this analysis, this lecture, this conversation. If you don't want to give any money, just pass the hat around. Please don't leave just because we're passing a little old hat around, right? All I'm going to say is this. If you have the capacity and want to make a donation that is big enough for a tax deduction, I've got the ability to give you a card for that. And Tom, where are you at? Tom will also take a credit card if you need a tax donation, okay? So Tom, wave your hand. Can you bring that out, or do they need to come to you?
Let me check.
So if you want to make a credit card donation, Tom will come up here in the front and he'll just get his attention, okay? And if you don't want to, that's fine, but I just want to make sure, because, I worked on Jesse Jackson's campaigns in 1984 and 1980. You know what Jesse Jackson taught? He taught me a lot. He taught me how to put myself under the leadership of a person of color as a white person. He taught me about Palestine. You know what else he taught? Never insult somebody by not giving them the opportunity to financially contribute to what they believe in. So here's Tom. Tom, just get his attention. Just scan the crowd. If anybody wants to run a credit card, so there's Terry.
I need you to show me this because it didn't work for me.
All right.
I'm going to make a $28 contribution myself, and that's the first of one every month for the year.
Oh my goodness. That is fantastic. So there it goes. And if you can't slide it, you can also, well, if it doesn't work, then you can you can push in the numbers, right? All right. Thank you for that. And so let's go to this. Thank you. So, sir, I know that you've been patient. So, any comment or question that you have? You're up.
He's ready.
Put the microphone up if you want.
I want to ask a question.
Please do.
And I'm comparing the transnational trade agreements like NAFTA and the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership and others now to the ones that we rebelled against during our revolution. Would you comment about that?
I surely will, because if you make it easy, doesn't he, right? He asked me, compare the international trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and for that matter, NAFTA and others, to the intolerable acts and other international trade agreements that provoked the American Revolution. It's actually easy to do, right? And let me be very explicit about that. Look, you know the Boston Tea Party, right? We've been taught about that. Do y'all think that they threw all the tea in the harbor that night? No. They only threw one type of tea in the harbor that night. You know what type of tea got thrown in the harbor? Only tea owned by the East India Tea Company. That's the only tea that was destroyed. You know why? Because they were angry at the intolerable acts that were forcing all goods, especially tea, to have to go through London and get double taxed, and to allow the state monopoly of the East India Company against the merchants, right? In other words, here's another way to think about it. The Boston Tea Party was also properly understood to be an act of nonviolent civil disobedience by a group of people who were angry at the international trade policies of the government working in cahoots with corporations. Sometimes I wish the modern Tea Party folks would do another layer of research and understand really what they're celebrating, because I would celebrate that too. So, sir, what I would say is this. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is attempting to recreate an entire global mechanism to control trade. It's not free trade, it's corporate managed trade. I want there to be the exchange of goods and services, and you know what else? I want there to be the exchange of art and culture and food and all of the different things that a genuinely multicultural world gives and avails to us. But what I don't want is secret tribunals able to actually dictate and govern how commerce is supposed to work. Actually, corporate managed trade strikes at the very heart of what we've been taught to understand genuine entrepreneur mechanisms are supposed to operate. So that's how I would answer that question. Yes, sir?
David, if I may just make a comment. The Move to Amend is going to be out in Black Mountain this Sunday at the White Horse Black Mountain. We're going to be showing the U.S. of Alec. If anyone doesn't know who Alec is, I promise you it's the most terrifying Halloween movie you'll ever see. It's a true story. It's about the corporations who are in collusion with our state government, and it's to support the teachers and everybody that's trying to get back to democracy. And if anybody has any friends that live out in Black Mountain, please come out this Sunday at 2:30 in the afternoon, White Horse Black Mountain.
Tell them what ALEC stands for.
ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and it's a secret lobby group that has gone into collusion with our state government because they need the money to get elected. ALEC brings them on free vacations and creates a sample model legislation that gets passed at our state level. And this is the why behind why they're beating up public education, and they're trying to privatize everything. They've privatized the prison system since 1980, quadrupled the U.S. prison population since 1980. And so there's a positive, at the end of the day, there's a positive thing, because since Trayvon Martin was shot, the public is finding out about ALEC and that they created the Stand Your Ground laws. 72 major corporations have left their membership in ALEC in the last few years. So there's a lot of super exciting things going on to get our democracy back. Please, let's get together and put our heads together and fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. So, to make sure everybody understands, this Sunday at White Horse Black Mountain, 2:30 p.m., ALEC Exposed, and I do think, thank you, Tom, for that. And good on the local Move to Amend group. We are beginning to partner more and more with filmmakers who are telling stories that actually expose this reality. And I could not agree more. The American Legislative Exchange Council is actually an example of the fusion of huge transnational corporations and our very government. And I want to remind you that somebody actually described that. His name was Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator and fascist, was also a political philosopher, actually. People forget that. And he actually said proudly, fascism really more properly should be called corporatism, because it merges the military might of our nation states with the economic might of our corporations. And he thought that was a good thing. I think that we have to really come to terms with the fact that if we're going to allow things like the American Legislative Exchange Council, the big mega corporations, to literally draft laws and then bring elected state legislators together to wine and dine them at these super swank luxury retreats, and then have them pass laws that gut public education, that privatize the prisons and privatize our school system and create these stand your ground laws, we're seeing and witnessing what is happening. And friends, that's going to continue unless and until we interrupt it. Yes, sir. You're next.
I'm just holding the mic for everyone else.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like your overview on the Supreme Court and why the Supreme Court would do such a thing. It's obvious, I think, to a lot of people, maybe even the majority.
Yes, I think you're right. And look, I follow the court, right, a lot, and I can tell you that we are witnessing in the dissenting opinions now, the opinions back and forth, a level of dispute that just never happens. It's never happened in my lifetime. The way they're starting to talk about each other in writing never has happened before in my lifetime. Why? Because there is a which side are you on moment that's coming. This court, the Roberts Court, is the most activist court that any of us have lived to see. You have to go back to the Lochner era, the era just during the New Deal, when the courts were overturning the minimum wage laws and public safety laws and working conditions laws, all these laws that were trying to be passed. The court was overturning them left and right, and FDR, actually, y'all remember the stitch in time that saved 9? This was actually because, Roosevelt said, you know what, we're going to do the New Deal, and if we just have to increase the number of people on the Supreme Court, that's what we're going to do. And that, by the way, is a totally constitutional thing to do. And all of a sudden, the court then said, oh, wait a minute, we're going to actually reevaluate all these laws. The point I'm getting at is we have to understand that we've been trained to think of the court as some genuinely independent, above politics kind of institution. That's not true. John Roberts is the most clear example of a judicial activist who is imposing his worldview on the legislative political process by overturning democratically enacted laws. And he's willing to do it. He's basically gutted Brown versus Board of Education. We don't even know that, but it's happening. Now, Peter, why is it happening? I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm glad I'm being recorded so I can say it. I hope that it goes out far and wide. Because he is a right-wing ideologue. He has a worldview that actually lifts up the ruling elite and expects us to be grateful that they exist. He's dangerous.
Yep.
Who's pulling his strings? So who's pulling his strings? What I would say is this. Himself. He's part of a worldview, right? And in fact, if you want to see what that worldview looks like, all you have to go is to go back to the Powell memo of the 1970s. Lewis Powell, Supreme Court. Anybody know the Powell memo? A couple of hands go up. I wish everybody knew the Powell memo. See, Lewis Powell was a Democrat who was actually on, as a lawyer represented the Chamber of Commerce. And in the late 60s, early 70s, the ruling elite were scared witless. They thought they were going to lose control of the entire country. You know why the ruling elite was scared witless? They were about to lose control of the entire country. Those of you who lived through that era, I don't think you properly give yourself enough credit. There was a nonviolent revolution brewing in this country around values and culture. And people were beginning to question in a fundamental way how foreign policy operated, how society operated, and people were actually experimenting with entire new social, political, and economic institutions. And the ruling elite were scared. Lewis Powell wrote a memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce who said, the Ralph Naders of the world, the public interest of the world, these environmental groups, read this memo, it's chilling. He said, they are challenging the very essence of what it means to be American. And we must fight back. We must purge them from our academic institutions. We must purge them from our legal institutions. We must take on the, quote, liberal control of the media. In other words, the Powell memo is a framework for how the ruling elite would actually strike at the heart of actual American political experience. And they knew what they were doing. And they laid it out and they implemented it. Thus was born the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, a whole series, the Federalist Society, a whole series of things that have now played out over the last 30 to 40 years. And I say this with sincerity, with gentleness, but with clarity. Friends, part of the problems is people like us have been asleep at the switch. We've been too casual. We've been too cavalier. We have We have rested on the laurels of past movements, and we've forgotten that our role as citizens is supposed to be active participants. Right? And here's the other thing. When a corporation can claim constitutional rights, it turns us from being active participants to mere spectators. I'm here to tell you, we have to understand and recognize that the court is illegitimately trying to redefine American society itself. That's what I think is going on, Peter. Yes, sir.
I have a loud voice anyway. Just a clarification, observation, then a question too.
Sure.
I noticed that the majority of the times that you were referencing nonviolent direct action, it sounded as though it was an arrestable offense. Please let people know that the majority of nonviolent direct action is like, includes that, but there's a lot that you can do without getting arrested.
I sure will. And I know you got a follow-up, so I think I can do. So it's true, I have referenced arrestable offenses, which I'm willing to do, but most of my nonviolent civil disobedience and direct action never at all even triggers a possible arrest. In fact, I appreciate the brother's careful use of language, because for me, and I reckon him, but for me, the phrase direct action is very profound and very important. See, protests are not direct action. The phrase direct action means to cause or change to either stop what you don't like or to create what you do like, to act directly given your own ability to make change happen. You know what one of the most powerful acts of direct action and nonviolent civil disobedience that I know of? Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs takes food and feeds hungry people and says it really doesn't matter whether or not you have given us a little check mark or permission to do it. So there's an example. Another type of direct action that you can do actually is, and I mean this sincerely, to vote. You can tell, right? She said, I know where that boy's going. Voting can absolutely be an act of direct action. And here's the thing, I see your hand. I do want to be very clear. He's got a follow-up. So if you'll go over there, here's the thing. If you want systemic transformational change and all you ever do is go and pull a lever every 2 to 4 years, you're wasting your time. But there's a follow-up and corollary. If you want systemic transformational change and you don't bother to vote for candidates who are calling for systemic transformational change, you're wasting a very valuable opportunity. So I say we have to vote. I say we have to create new institutions using direct action. I say we have to be willing to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience that might be. In other words, all the tools in the toolbox ought to be useful and usable, but only do the ones that you're comfortable with. Please don't think that you have to use everything. So you got to follow.
Well, and with following the direct action segue, I mean, it's voting with yourself, and it's outside. Direct action is action taken, outside the acceptable social,
Correct.
economic, and political system. Okay, as you wax poetic through your description of the concepts of the Constitution, I think it would serve our purposes, to understand if you were to agree that the Constitution is in essence a property rights document written by a bunch of white guys that own their women and slaves. So that changes the perspective a little bit, but
no, it does. So I appreciate that because everything is like going deeper. Everything becomes a little more complex. But I will actually pick that up and actually tell you that I agree with you.
So and in final, this is more a question of like, how can we do this with younger people, less well-resourced people, and people who aren't all this light.
I'm glad you bring it up.
I don't see them here, and I know that you do this in front of lots of other crowds. I don't know if that's endemic to Asheville or it's just something we're not getting. How do we organize to get that here?
Well, thank you for that. There's a lot there, brother. And so what I will say is this notion of the Constitution as a property rights document is absolutely correct. I would agree with that. One thing that could happen right now in Asheville, by the way, is if y'all actually were taking voting really seriously and actually had political power and were sufficiently organized, you could actually start writing laws that actually protected the environment, protected workers, and you actually said it doesn't matter what the courts say. We, the people, have the authority to protect the waterways here in Asheville, North Carolina, and we're going to exercise it through the legislative process. There's a way to actually do direct action in that fashion. I want to now actually very quickly, I see, thanks for your patience, but very quickly, this notion, the reality is this, that like I do talk to young people, I talk to people of color, I talk to a lot of different groups of folks. What I've discovered is groups basically look like the core people who organized it. And so when there are people, like one of the things that we're doing with Move to Men is partnering with Hip Hop Congress, a group of young black and brown artists and musicians on a theme called What the Bleep Happened to Hip Hop. And the short answer, corporations happen to hip hop, right? And so I am working with Shimako Noble, an MC and an artist and a culture worker, where we're starting to bring our groups together to actually have that conversation. And the groups look very different, right? When I go on to universities, usually I talk to younger people. So what I would say is this, we should never berate ourselves for whoever shows up, but we should lovingly challenge ourselves, as this brother did. How can we actually go in to less resourced folks, poor people, and have these kinds of conversations? How can we go in to groups where young people are coalescing and have honest conversations with them? How can we go to communities of color and have real legitimate conversations? And here's the thing, it takes time and it takes authenticity. And I promise you, if you do the work, it will bear sweet, sweet fruit. And I'm going to now tell you this. I stand before you as a member of Move to Men's national leadership team. There are 10 of us across this country. I'm the only white man. Think about that for a minute. Move to Men's national leadership team is led by mostly women, mostly people of color, and we're all across the country, from Texas to North Carolina, Georgia, Utah, California, New York. We actually come out of the movement. And because we've done the work over time of building relationships with other impacted communities, it reflects in our national leadership. So I appreciate not only the point you made, but I want to lift up and honor how gently and lovingly he made the point. Not to denigrate any of us, but to recognize we've got to do the work around race and gender and class. And here's the thing. When we do that, we win. And if we don't do that, we actually can't win. Because I will speak for myself. I don't know this gentleman well enough to speak for him, but I'll tell you this. What we at Move to Men knows, we got to do this work around race and gender and class, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is the right thing to do. It's the right ethical and moral thing to do. As a matter of strategic, tactical clarity, we can't win unless we actually do the work around race and gender and class. And then when we do that, we have cleaved that Gordian knot I mentioned otherwise, and everything becomes available to us. That's how I answer that question. Yes, ma'am.
You're very inspiring. Thank you so much. I'm coming up.
Yes.
I wanted to show you.
Microphone.
Just
The microphone. Here, I'm going to hold this for you so that you can tell the group what
Okay. This is exactly why a group of neighbors in Kenilworth started a neighborhood grassroots movement called the Power of 3 Votes. And we're dedicated to turning out as many votes as possible during early voting by asking people to take 2 friends to vote. And we're going to be joining, and we're hoping everyone here will help us ignite this movement by joining us on this Thursday, October 23rd at 3:30 p.m. Mountains People Assembly is organizing this march, and there'll be a lot of organizations joining it, including ours. And we hope to see you there. It's going to be meeting at the Vance Monument, and we'll march with a marching band led by the Hillcrest Marching Band, and we'll go straight to the Board of Elections. We're asking people to vote early so that, because if we get I don't pray, but I'm dreaming of about 500 to 1,000 people showing up to early vote and break the record, you know, because in 2010 there were only 40% of people who turned out to vote at a midterm election, and that's kind of what we're trying to change. And once you voted, when you go in there and voted, come out, take a selfie, and challenge 2 friends to come out and early vote. And so, you know, from 1 vote, you'll get 3 votes, and then another 3, and that's how we're hoping to get more votes up. And talking about musicians, we've got Cat Williams will be playing for us on October the 29th, Wednesday, at the West Asheville Library polling station. You don't know Cat, but I think everybody here does.
I can see by the reaction.
Yes, between 5 and 7. And then there's a group of black churches, they're calling themselves Roll to the Polls. They're going to walk from the church to that particular voting station, and once they've got the I voted sign on, they can go to the hub for a free meal. So, you know, these are all the things that we felt as neighbors we could do, because when I think outside of that box, I get too nervous.
Can I get a round of applause for when she gets the shot? I hope we'll see you at the barricades. I hope we'll see you in churches and synagogues and mosques and temples. I hope that we'll see you everywhere where human beings congregate.
Could you say something about your move to amend? You alluded to it in other groups, but I'm thinking of the Occupy movement. Sure. I'm thinking of 350.org.
Yes.
Are you a collective, or are you following a parallel?
Parallel is how I would say it. So I agree. Look, Move to Men would never dare to speak for Occupy, but we happily collaborate with Occupy. In fact, we are the only group at the Occupy National Gathering that was formally endorsed Move to Men and the call to abolish corporate constitutional rights. And you know why, I think? Because we were the group that actually showed up and sat in circle and didn't try to actually take it over, but actually said, and I want to be very honest about something. I've been trying to spark a nonviolent rebellion in this country for 25 years, right? And Occupy happened, and I'm going to be very honest about something. Does anybody know who Kali Lauzon is? This is the publisher, the original publisher and editor of Adbusters magazine. Yeah. This was the first group that actually called for the Occupy at Zuccotti Park. I called him, not knowing that they were doing this like occupation thing. It was like, you know, several months before. And I said, Kali, you should endorse Move to Men, and I want you to write about it in Adbusters. And he's this crazy, he's got this unique accent because he's Estonian from Eastern Europe, but he lives in French Canada. So he's got this crazy accent and he talks real fast. And he said, oh, no, you don't understand. You're missing the zeitgeist at the moment. Well, Occupy us and cut the park, and we'll bring people all over, and he real fast. And I said, well, look, you know, Kali, I was with you at the IMF and World Bank protests. I was with you in Seattle at WTO. I got tear gassed along with everybody else. I'm tired of shouting at buildings. I said, Kali, we need a concrete campaign, and Move to Men is a concrete campaign. And he said, no, David, you're missing the moment. Postmodernism. like all these kind of words. And I remember thinking at the time, I said, well, good luck to you, Kali, but we need a concrete campaign. He said, no, we need to capture the imagination space. And here's the thing. He was right and I was wrong. But I was right and he was wrong. I often think about what if I and others had been patient enough and really stood in there long enough to say, what if we actually had a zeitgeist and a moment that Occupy clearly ignited, and then a concrete campaign that was actually structural enough and systemic enough? And honestly, y'all, I think Move to Men is working with Occupy, which, by the way, still exists.
Yeah.
Just because the camps aren't going on. And by the way, why aren't the camps going on? Because the federal government destroyed them, that's why. All right, we have to understand that. They were scared of what was happening in those camps.
Jubilee provides tremendous support for the
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We're going to applaud that. And here's the thing I want to underscore. To me, Occupy isn't dead. It's still going on. And it's going to reemerge, right, in the public consciousness. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'll tell you this. It's already there. People are already in conversation. And I pledge to you this. When Occupy 2.0 really emerges on the scene, Move to Men will collaborate with that too. Right? Just like we collaborate with 350.org and every other group that will actually work with us. So I see that most people are leaving. I want to say, I'm going to stick around if people want a little one-on-one. Can we get one more? If you're with the local Move to Men group, stand up for a moment if you're capable of standing up. I want